burning sun of an intense affirmation of life. One nod from her, and I had been ready to blow myself, the house, the city, or the world sky high. I bought a copy of the little volume of Mozart on the road to Prague in matchbook cover format and wrapped it in 12 narrow lines of poetry I had written for her. Thinking I would soon have to support a large family, I decided to work overtime writing dividend certificates. God alone knows how hard that was. My colleagues at the office were astonished to see me clean-shaven every day. When I received my first overtime check, I sent her a gold chain. Then I had a dream suit made for myself. 10 years later, by the way, this woman became my wife. Even this she remains nameless. After this brief detour, Solomon's narrative blithely returns to its former path, focusing mainly on his almost symbiotic friendship with Kern, one of the murderers of Rathenau. His thoughts stay with Kern until Solomon is given a 5-year sentence for his role in planning the assassination. Released from prison, he goes to her home. She was visibly startled when he opened the door. She led me silently through the hallway into the room. She set the table for tea. When she glanced over at me, I staunchly held back any feelings of sympathy. That's all he has to say about her. The same evening he goes out to a cafe with his brother, who has turned up as a matter of course, unannounced in other words, at her home. They go without her. His love for her has fed him violent images, opening up the bottomless chasm of savage longing for death and hurling him towards the burning sun of an intense affirmation of life. The resulting impulse was to blow everything sky high. The danger of destroying others and of self-dissolution originates in this love. Solomon's thoughts seem to revolve around an idea he calls woman, but which has a very different meaning, something that comes to the fore in his observations after leaving prison. The strangest thing of all was the women. They had nothing in common with the women in my prison dreams. Their faces seemed naked and boring, just as monotonous as their long, uninteresting legs. The only things that reminded me of the dreadful torments of my cell were the wrinkles of their shiny silk stockings made at the knee. They alone seemed alive. Fetishistic object, the wrinkles of stockings at the knee is the only thing capable of exciting him, though not pleasurably. The memory of torments is what stirs him, while nakedness and long legs, two attributes usually considered sexually stimulating, leave him indifferent. I was a single man approaching 40. I knew quite a few eligible girls, yet when I really thought about it, I knew that what I wanted was to pursue the youthful dream of love that still lived inside me. Economic obstacles no longer stood in my way. Unfortunately, however, other factors had produced such serious conflict with my father that I could not bring any young woman into the family. Those remarks on page 106 of his memoirs represent General von Lethau-Vorbach's first attempt to come to terms with the problem of women. The initial foray must have exhausted his energies, since he returns to the topic only after an 8-page digression on military matters. I suffered setbacks in my personal life as well. After reconciling with my father, I wanted to propose to the young woman who had filled my imagination from the time when I was a lieutenant. I had completely withdrawn from her to allow her total freedom. Now I learned that she had just gotten married. I was crestfallen. I had no success in attempting to win the hand of another woman. Her heart was no longer free. Despite the discipline of my military duties, there were times when I felt quite crushed. He does not reveal the source of the serious conflict with his father, nor how it was resolved. He says nothing further about what it meant to have times when he was quite crushed either. Indeed, the qualifiers quite and there were times when raised doubts as to how crushed he actually was. In the same way, he does not say who the women in question were. After that brief allusion, Lethau drops the matter as if he had already said too much. Lethau has a lot to say about other things, however. He indicates, for instance, that the rigor of his military service functioned as a facade, and that the women who filled his imagination for 20 years had no need to exist anywhere else. The phrase, "to allow her total freedom," means just the opposite. As far as he is concerned, she hadn't the slightest freedom. The phrase could be turned around to read, "to allow me total freedom." not to pursue other women, but to escape the one he has internalized. In Wilhelmshaven, I met a woman to whom I was immediately drawn. She was married, though, a Gordian knot, yet everything worked out wonderfully. This bait is dangled before us for 60 pages until the fish is finally landed in the chapter Marriage, My Time in the Army and the Kaputsch. I was surprised that I hadn't heard anything from a woman I had been friends with, and I found out she'd been divorced for some years and had lovingly looked after my aging parents in Berlin during the hardest years of the war. That meant she could not have forgotten me. I was now 49 and thought the time was right to leave the single life behind. It was March 2nd, and on March 6th I was to report to Field Marshal von Hindenburg in Kolberg. I felt sure I'd be transferred immediately to the Baltic. There wasn't much time for getting married, so I sent a brazen telegram to my future wife in Flensburg saying that I expected her at my parents' house in Berlin right away. Lieutenant Christensen, who had in 1915 sent a ship laden with war material to our rescue in East Africa, was with her when my telegram arrived. Thunderstruck, she showed him the telegram. He kissed her hand emotionally. I went to my parents' house and revealed my intent to marry. When my future wife cabled she would arrive in Berlin on March 4th, I scheduled the wedding for March 5th. To prevent her from delaying her trip to Berlin, I never told her that I had marriage in mind. When I met my wife at the Luther station on the evening of March 4th, I told her I would marry her at 11 a.m. on March 5th. Struck speechless by this announcement, she adamantly refused. The road to the general's bed seems to run directly through his parents' living room. It is loving attention paid to those parents that prompts him to think of this woman when considering marriage. He recognizes that right away. That meant she could not have forgotten me. His telegram does not say that he expects her in Berlin, but that he expects her, a command, at his parents' home in Berlin. Unlike the woman, who is she? His childhood sweetheart? The one from Wilhelmshaven? The parents are informed of Lettau's intent. The wedding takes place as a matter of course, but not in church. If the Lettaus can't go to the church will come to the Lettaus. The ceremony took place as planned at 11 a.m. on March 5th by my father's bedside. Wearing the Iron Cross First Class he had won in 1870, he sat erect with my mother beside him in her wheelchair. The sacrificial lamb in that horrific Prussian wedding is the woman. He treats her just as he had treated the one who filled his imagination for 20 years. He is more strongly drawn to the Baltic campaign than to her. The woman is expected to begin living within an image and a myth. She, Madame Nameless, is now the wife of Letau Vorbuk, Africanus, the hero of East Africa, the man who returned unvanquished from the Great Lost War. The mere mention of Letau's name in connection with the woman is enough to impel Lieutenant Christensen to kiss that woman's hand emotionally. Lieutenant Christensen, for his part, is an honorable man. He knows Letau from the war and spends time with ladies only to prevent them from traveling in bad company. The omission of the woman's name is made all the more striking by the fact that Letau Vorbuk is otherwise so good with names and dates. He knows a multitude of people who he nearly always mentions by name. Even the young girl chosen to present him with an official bouquet on his return from Africa has a name, Lotta Heksker. Dates are no problem either. Lieutenant Christensen, 1915, telegram to Flensburg, March 2nd, to Hindenburg, March 6th, wedding ceremony, 11 a.m. on March 5th. Meeting his wife at the Luther station, evening of March 4th, announcement of the wedding on March 5th at 11, and the Iron Cross, 1870. All that gives the impression of an ingrained habit acquired on the general staff of a life that is planned and reviewed, constructed like a military campaign, short, clipped field reports, expressions like first class or a piece of cake. She alone remains nameless, dateless, outside history. 20 pages later, we discover in passing that she has a daughter and twin sons from her first marriage. When the first son of her second marriage is born, Letau writes, "The baptism of my little Rudiger." Only the son evokes such emphasis on Letau's own paternity. When a girl is born in November 1923, a daughter has been added to the family. The wife dies. Letao writes an extended obituary, finding words for the woman now that she is dead. The obituary, the longest section of the book devoted to her, is annihilating. I never came to terms with my wife's death. She was so vivacious, warm, and happy that no one who came into contact with her could remain indifferent. Almost everyone she met felt drawn to her and basked in the sunlight she radiated. It was that way in the social world she loved so much, at gatherings of the colonial Germans, at the countless teas she gave in her beloved winter garden in Bremen, or when employees from Kierstadt or some other firm visited her. Without trying, she was the natural center of attention. It was the same way in Waterwenstorf when she would invite droves of refugees from the East for coffee and cake in our room. In Hamburg, when we expected to spend our autumn years together, she gave our new home the stamp of her personality and the exquisite taste she had inherited as a descendant of the Goethe portraitist Tischbein. When she departed from us, it seemed as if she were still alive and might walk through the door at any moment. She loved the social whirl, that was it. The rest of it simply says that she was a superb representative, a quality her husband admired since it enhances the esteem the world owes him in any case. Her exquisite taste being inherited is only partially attributable to her. Letao adorns her with the male names of Goethe and Tischbein, just as Rosbach had embellished the memory of his second wife with Schüler and Heinrich George. The absence of real relations between Letao and his wife is underscored by the fact that he ventures to speak of her at length only after her death. Not only the wife is treated in that way, his two sons are fully appreciated only after they have fallen in battle. The result of all this is that the reader begins to grow uneasy whenever Letao devotes more than one sentence of praise to a family member. That person will soon be dead, we conclude, and we are right. Some massive suppressed aggression seems to be contained in those obituaries, a wishing to death. The words, "when she departed from us, it seemed as if she were still alive," might be interpreted as a confirmation that her death has made little real difference. Once Letao has discharged the genteel duties of eulogizing, he generally turns to a description of some hunt. Admittedly, there are hunts after almost every other event in the book. By the end of his autobiography, we are well informed in at least one respect. We know when, where, and what Letao has shot.